There are moments in royal life that stop the world mid-breath, moments where the grandeur of an occasion suddenly becomes secondary to a single, electric detail that nobody quite expected. The evening of the French state banquet at Windsor Castle was supposed to be about diplomacy, about the carefully choreographed relationship between two great European nations, about speeches in crystal glasses and the precise pageantry that the British monarchy has perfected over centuries. But the moment Princess Catherine stepped through those gilded doors wearing one of the most emotionally charged tiaras in royal history, everything else fell away. And somewhere in that magnificent room, cameras caught Queen Camilla's reaction. That fleeting, unscripted moment became the image the world could not stop talking about. To understand why that single glance ignited such global conversation, you have to understand what was really happening in that room. This was not simply two royal women attending a formal dinner. This was history walking in wearing diamonds, and everyone present knew it. When Princess Catherine disappeared from public life in late 2023, the silence surrounding her absence was deafening. The palace offered careful, measured statements. The press speculated. The public worried. For a woman who had become one of the most visible and beloved figures in the modern monarchy, her sudden withdrawal from royal duties created a vacuum that no amount of official reassurance could entirely fill. What followed was one of the most profound personal journeys any senior royal has undertaken in living memory. Surgery. A cancer diagnosis delivered in the quiet, devastating way that such news always arrives, stripping away the ceremony and the titles and leaving only a person confronting their own mortality. Then came the treatment, months of chemotherapy that demanded everything she had and left very little room for the public role she had spent years carefully building. During those long months, she spoke about the experience with a rare and moving honesty. She described how life can transform without warning, how even the strongest foundations can feel uncertain when illness enters the picture, and how the journey back toward health is rarely as straightforward as the world outside might imagine. Those words resonated with millions of people who had faced similar battles without cameras waiting outside their homes. That was precisely what made her return so powerful. When she finally confirmed that her chemotherapy was complete and that she was in remission, it felt like a collective exhale. But reading a statement and seeing a woman stand confidently in the grand halls of Windsor Castle wearing the late Queen's most iconic tiara are two entirely different experiences. One is information, the other is proof. Before we can truly understand what happened that evening, we need to talk about the jewel itself, because the Lover's Knot tiara is not simply a beautiful object. It is a living archive of royal history, a piece of jewelry that has absorbed the emotions, the struggles, and the triumphs of some of the most remarkable women the British monarchy has ever known. The story begins in 1913, when the tiara was created by the royal jeweler Gerard for Queen Mary. She had been inspired by a family heirloom, a tiara once owned by her grandmother, Princess Augusta of Hesse. Rather than simply admiring the original from a distance, Queen Mary commissioned an entirely new version, reportedly contributing pieces from her own jewelry collection to make it possible. The result was an extraordinary creation featuring diamond lovers' knots hanging from a diamond and pearl-encrusted frame, each knot suspending a drop pearl of exceptional quality. It was opulent without being excessive, historical without being stiff, and above all, it was deeply personal. Queen Mary was not a woman known for sentiment in the conventional sense. She was formal, composed, and deeply committed to the dignity of the crown. But the fact that she went to such lengths to recreate a treasured family design tells you everything about how she regarded jewelry. Not as decoration, but as memory made visible. She wore it, she treasured it, and when she passed away in 1953, the tiara passed to Queen Elizabeth II, who added it to the extraordinary collection of jewels that would come to define one of the longest and most consequential reigns in British history. But it was a third royal woman who would transform the Lover's Knot from a treasured heirloom into a global icon. When the young Diana Spencer married Prince Charles in 1981 and began her extraordinary, complicated, ultimately tragic journey as Princess of Wales, she was given the tiara on loan by Queen Elizabeth II. Diana wore it frequently. most memorably at a series of high-profile diplomatic and state occasions throughout the 1980s. Photographs of her wearing it became some of the most reproduced royal images of the 20th century. There was something about the combination of Diana's particular luminosity and the tiara's cascading diamond arches that created an image almost impossibly beautiful and heartbreakingly fragile in retrospect. What many people do not fully appreciate is that Diana reportedly found the tiara uncomfortable. It was heavy, she said, and wearing it for long evenings could cause genuine physical discomfort. Yet she continued to wear it because she understood, perhaps better than anyone of her generation, that royal jewelry is never purely about aesthetics. It is communication. It is statement. It is the silent language through which the monarchy speaks to its people across centuries. After Diana's separation from Prince Charles in 1992, her divorce in 1996, and her devastating death in Paris in 1997, the tiara retreated from public view. For years it remained in the royal collection, a beautiful and profoundly melancholy artifact. Then, in 2015, Queen Elizabeth II loaned it to Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge and wife of Prince William. That decision was widely interpreted as deliberate and meaningful, a quiet acknowledgement of Catherine's place in the royal lineage, a passing of something precious and irreplaceable from one generation to the next. The state banquet honoring the French president on the 8th of July 2025 was an occasion of considerable diplomatic importance. France and Britain share a relationship layered with centuries of rivalry, alliance, cultural exchange, and mutual respect that defies simple description. A state visit of this magnitude requires meticulous preparation, and Windsor Castle, with its 1,000 years of history embedded in every stone, provides a setting that communicates the weight of the occasion without a single word being spoken. The guest list was luminous, the table settings were immaculate, King Charles III and Queen Camilla were already present, and Camilla herself was a study in royal elegance. Wearing a magnificent ivory gown paired with the Belgian sapphire tiara and matching necklace and bracelet, pieces with their own extraordinary history. Those sapphires had been given to the young Princess Elizabeth as a wedding gift in 1947, which meant that Camilla was wearing jewels that had belonged to the late Queen for nearly 8 decades. The symbolism was powerful and unmistakable. And then Catherine entered. The moment she appeared in the doorway wearing a crimson gown and Queen Mary's lover's knot tiara, the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that is very difficult to articulate, but impossible to misread. There is something about seeing that particular tiara in person, especially worn by someone who has just emerged from the kind of personal crisis that would break most people, that simply stops conversation. The diamonds catch the light differently than almost any other piece in the royal collection. The drop pearls move almost imperceptibly as the wearer turns her head, creating a subtle animation that photographs capture imperfectly. And worn above a face that had been through what Catherine's had been through, the effect was genuinely overwhelming. She moved through the room with a composure that several observers noted felt different from her pre-illness appearances. There was stillness to her confidence now, a quality of having been tested and endured that no amount of preparation or training produces on its own. You only carry yourself that way after you have survived something real. It was in this charged atmosphere that cameras captured the moment that would consume royal commentary for days afterward. As Catherine made her way through the assembled guests, footage appeared to show Queen Camilla's reaction at the precise moment she registered the Princess of Wales's arrival. The exchange lasted only seconds. Camilla's expression shifted briefly, subtly, in a way that broadcasters and royal watchers immediately began analyzing frame by frame. The speculation that followed was both inevitable and revealing about the complexity of the moment itself. Some viewers interpreted what they saw as genuine admiration, a senior royal woman recognizing the quiet courage it takes to return to the public stage after everything Catherine had endured. Others read something more layered into the expression, a recognition perhaps of the extraordinary symbolic weight carried by a woman wearing Diana's most famous tiara at one of the monarchy's most significant occasions. A smaller but vocal group suggested that the camera had caught something more complicated, the complex emotional mathematics of two women whose relationships to the crown. to its history, and to its future are fundamentally different. What is extraordinary about this moment is not actually what Camilla was thinking, which none of us can know with any certainty. What is extraordinary is what the world's response to that moment reveals about how deeply people feel invested in the hidden emotional lives of the royal family. We watched and rewatched those few seconds of footage because we were looking for permission to feel something, a confirmation from inside the palace walls that the significance of what we were witnessing was as real as it felt. To understand the visual and symbolic drama of that evening, it helps to step back and consider what Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales, each represent in the ongoing story of the British monarchy, because they represent genuinely different chapters, and the jewels they wore that evening made those differences impossible to ignore. Camilla's path to the crown was unlike anything British royal history had previously produced. Her relationship with Prince Charles was the subject of extraordinary public scrutiny and hostility for years, her name becoming, for a long period, almost synonymous in public consciousness with the pain of Diana's marriage. The fact that she has arrived at a place of genuine public respect and institutional authority is, when you examine it honestly, a remarkable achievement that required decades of patient endurance and quiet service. The sapphires she wore that evening, pieces that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, reflected exactly this quality of her position. These were jewels earned through time, through persistence, through the slow accumulation of trust and legitimacy. Catherine's story has an entirely different texture. She arrived in the royal family already beloved, her engagement to Prince William received with genuine public joy, her wedding watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world. She stepped into a role that the public had already decided she was made for, and she spent years carefully and skillfully living up to that expectation. The lover's knot tiara, which Queen Elizabeth II chose to loan her in 2015, was almost immediately understood as a signal about Catherine's future place in the royal story. It connected her explicitly to Diana, while also suggesting that she was being trusted with something precious and irreplaceable. When she wore that same tiara to the French state banquet, having just completed chemotherapy and returned from the most difficult period of her life, the symbolic meaning became even richer and more complex. She was not simply wearing a beautiful piece of jewelry. She was wearing a declaration about continuity, about survival, about the monarchy's capacity to absorb personal crisis and emerge intact on the other side. There is a tendency in discussions of royal jewelry to focus almost exclusively on monetary value or aesthetic beauty, and both of those dimensions are genuinely remarkable in the case of pieces like the lover's knot tiara. But the deeper and more interesting dimension is the communicative function that these objects serve within the specific world of the monarchy. Royal jewelry functions as a kind of visual language with its own grammar and vocabulary, a system of symbols through which the institution communicates messages about history, hierarchy, continuity, and intention without ever needing to speak them aloud. When a senior royal chooses a particular piece for a particular occasion, that choice is rarely accidental. Style teams, private secretaries, and the royals themselves consider the symbolic resonances of jewelry choices with the same care that politicians weigh their words before a major speech. The lover's knot tiara carries so much accumulated meaning that its appearance on any occasion immediately generates conversation. Its connection to Queen Mary speaks to the deep historical roots of the monarchy. Its connection to Queen Elizabeth II speaks to institutional continuity and the weight of the longest reign in British history. Its connection to Diana speaks to something more emotionally volatile, the still raw grief that millions of people around the world continue to feel for a woman who died nearly 3 decades ago, but whose presence in royal conversation has never diminished. When Catherine wears it, she is not simply borrowing jewelry. She is accepting the weight of all of those associations and declaring, through her bearing and her composure, that she is capable of carrying them. That is an act of considerable courage that tends to get lost in the glamour of the photographs. Royal observers have noted something significant about the pattern of Catherine's appearances since her return to full public duties. In 2025 alone, she attended 3 separate state visits at Windsor Castle. representing France, the United States, and Germany. The concentration of such high-profile diplomatic engagements within a single year was itself unusual. Britain had not hosted 3 state visits in one calendar year since the late 1980s, during the twilight years of Queen Elizabeth II's active diplomatic schedule. That Catherine attended every single one of them was not accidental. These appearances serve multiple purposes simultaneously. On the surface, they fulfill the monarchy's diplomatic function, providing the heads of state and their partners with access to the warmth and accessibility that the royal family, at its best, provides so naturally. But beneath that surface function, the appearances are also a demonstration of institutional resilience. A future king and queen who appear composed, committed, and fully present at the most demanding events on the royal calendar send a message that the monarchy is stable, that its future is secure, and that the transition from the Carolian era to whatever comes next is being carefully and thoughtfully prepared. Her appearance beside President Donald Trump at a state banquet was a particularly striking example of this dynamic. 18 months earlier, such a scene would have seemed almost unimaginable given what she was privately enduring. Seeing her seated at that table, composed and engaged, was a reminder that the distance between private suffering and public duty is one of the most demanding distances any human being can travel. There is a quality to Catherine's public presence since her return from illness that several people who have observed it in person have tried and somewhat struggled to describe. The most common word that emerges is stillness. She carries herself with a quality of quiet that feels less like restraint and more like depth, as though the experience of confronting serious illness at a relatively young age, while simultaneously trying to protect her children from awareness of the danger, has left her with something additional. Not sadness exactly, and not simply increased confidence, but something more like perspective, a knowledge earned the hardest possible way of what actually matters and what does not. That quality reads differently in person than it does in photographs, and it reads differently to a room full of diplomats and senior officials than it does to a television audience. In a room where authority is measured in subtle signals rather than explicit declarations, stillness is one of the most powerful signals of all. The British monarchy in 2025 and 2026 is an institution in transition in ways that are both visible and invisible. The Carolian era is still young. King Charles III came to the throne after the longest apprenticeship in royal history, and he brought to the role a set of personal convictions and priorities that have already begun to reshape the institution in ways large and small. The integration of Catherine back into the most demanding tier of royal duty is part of a broader recalibration of how the monarchy presents itself and what it represents. What the evening of the French state banquet ultimately demonstrated is that the monarchy's greatest strength remains what it has always been, its ability to make the personal institutional and the institutional personal simultaneously. Catherine's appearance that evening worked on both levels at once. It was personally moving because of everything she had been through. It was institutionally significant because of the jewel she wore and the occasion she had chosen to mark her return. And somewhere in those magnificent Windsor Castle rooms, with cameras rolling and the world watching, Camilla's camera caught expression became one more layer in a story that has been accumulating for decades. Whatever she was thinking in that moment, the image itself captured something true about the complexity and the depth of the world these women inhabit. A world where a tiara is never just a tiara, where an entrance is never just an entrance, and where a single evening can carry the weight of generations. The lover's knot tiara has rested on the heads of queens and princesses, absorbed the light of ballrooms and the flashes of 1,000 cameras, witnessed joy and heartbreak and history in the making. On that July evening at Windsor Castle, it sat once again at the center of a story that reminded the world why the British monarchy, for all its contradictions and complexities, continues to hold such a powerful grip on the global imagination, not because of the diamonds, but because of everything the diamonds mean. What do you think Catherine's decision to wear the lover's knot tiara that evening truly symbolized? Was she honoring the memory of those who wore it before her, or quietly announcing that a new chapter has begun? Share your thoughts in the calm.